New York State Cemetery Board to order. I'm Mark Pattison, representing Secretary Rosado and Chairman of the Board.
Paul Ambrose, representing Commissioner Howard Zucker of the Department of Health for the last time. And from here forward, it will be Tom Fuller, who's the Director of Funeral Directing at the Bureau of Funeral Directing at the Department of Health. He'll be taking over my seat on the board, starting at the next meeting, or actually at the conclusion of this one.
Right.
Tony Miller, Counsel to the Cemetery Board.
Joe Ambrose, Associate Accountant, Division of Cemeteries.
Brendan Stanton, Investigator, Division of Cemeteries.
Ron Green, Investigator, Division of Cemeteries.
Mike Seelman, Senior Investigator, Division of Cemeteries.
Alicia Young, Associate Accountant, Division of Cemeteries.
Louis Polishuk, Director, Division of Cemeteries. Since you didn't mention it, I'll mention for the record that the third board member, Jill Faber, could not be with us for this meeting. She had a scheduling conflict.
All right, but the good news is she got a promotion. She's Director of Regional Offices and going to be traveling more with the Attorney General, but she's hoping to be able to stay on the board, and we're hoping to keep her. And so Paul and I will endeavor on. Okay. And again, I think we've got quite a few things on the agenda in various shapes and sizes. Can we have the minutes? We've distributed the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any changes or comments to the minutes as mailed?
I did see a note from Tony that there was a change to Mount Lebanon. Tony, what would you like to
Yeah, I think
elaborate on that?
the description of the motion should simply be that, I think what was stated was the motion to approve based on divisions and memo. I couldn't find the recording. It's not up yet. At least I couldn't find it, but I think that's what was said.
Based on, so how do you want it to read exactly? I think that's right, but how do we want it to read exactly? How about just the memorandum prepared by the division, based on the memorandum prepared by the division?
Okay. Any other corrections, changes, comments to the minutes of the past meeting?
I have none.
Outstanding. All right. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Accepted. All right. Tony, we have legislation and regulations in a new format because we've got a new support staff. Or not
Yes,
support staff,
wonderful.
Paralegal.
We have a paralegal, which, I don't know, we've never had one in my time at counsel's office, so it's really nice to have a
Where is
paralegal.
It's not here.
There's 17 bills out there now. Actually,
But who's counting?
when you look at, I am. And some of them have companions in other houses.
Did you see it? Is it here?
It was emailed.
Yeah, I know. It
I
didn't
have
make my
it.
thing.
Okay, so go ahead. As long as
All right.
Paul's got it.
I can look on it.
A lot of them are repeats from prior bills, some of them going back, way back. That's a lot of action. There are some notable bills. I should probably point them out. This one's a repeat, number 4, Assembly 1254, Senate 2501. It would provide for the sole administration of the vandalism fund under the cemetery board and remove jurisdiction of the controller and the commissioner of tax. I don't know that that's gone anywhere, but I think it's a NISAC bill or a NISAC.
It was passed by both houses and vetoed by the governor.
Oh, it was.
That was a long time
That was
ago.
a long time ago.
What, 2012, 2013?
Yeah, going back several years. It's not currently announced.
This is interesting. Another bill last year that got passed by both houses of the legislature but vetoed is presented again. The bill that deals with abandonment. This is number 5 on the list. Assembly 1605, Senate 1876. It requires early notice to municipalities from division and from the cemetery the possibility of the appointment of a receiver, and also the possibility that a town that receives abandonment funds could receive them again 25 years later. So that bill is back on board.
Is the exclusive jurisdiction bill back yet?
Yeah, that's
The
number
first one, isn't it?
4 that I just
No,
read.
no, 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 that's the vandalism fund
First.
bill. That's the first one.
Yeah.
There.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
There's no same as yet, okay.
That- Yes, that is back on. Okay. Number 8. This has an interesting quirk in it. It would amend the general business law. This is Assembly 3207, Senate 1654. It's to protect basically war memorabilia more than 75 years old from being sold by a cemetery. It prohibits any cemetery from doing so unless they come in front of the cemetery board to obtain permission. But it doesn't, the bill doesn't limit it to our cemeteries. So any cemetery that might have this memorabilia would have to come to the board to seek permission.
Really?
Mission creep.
It's interesting.
Well, wait, it's not, is it only cemeteries that would have to get permission to sell such things, or is it anyone who has?
It's cemeteries. This bill is limited to cemeteries. Because apparently there was an issue with, people are starting to realize these things have monetary value, and a number of cemeteries do have this memorabilia because they've got interments dating way back. So it's become a problem that has been brought to the attention of the legislature. All right, any other things that I want to bring to the
Compare that with a bill to add 2 more members so we can have 5 instead of 3.
Yeah, right.
Add a commissioner of
Yeah.
history or,
Had memorabilia czar.
right.
Other, the usual proposed amendments to the penal code affecting cemetery desecration are back. There's a bill in the Senate. It's a one-house bill, but it's something worth watching. The intent of the bill is to give the mother greater control over fetal remains when there's a stillbirth. The public health, the health department is probably interested in this.
Vital records. Vital records thing.
The bill would permit the mother to bring remains to a cemetery or crematory herself. She can go to the local registrar herself. It doesn't have to be a funeral director, and obtain a burial transfer permit. That's never been permitted. It's always been the funeral director who had the right to get such a permit. And it's always been a funeral director who had to bring remains to a cemetery. This would change that with regard to funeral remains. So I think that has more impact than was intended by the drafter of the bill. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. Nothing has, well, there's one bill that's moved. Which one moved? I don't see it. Apparently not. Okay, I think that's it. Nothing more to report.
So great, we'll continue to monitor those and certainly can take any comments on pending legislation from the public or other interested parties at the appropriate time. Anything else from you, Tony?
That's it.
Thank you for your report. We have a division report.
Actually, wait.
Yep.
I'm sorry. I meant to mention this when we went over the minutes. One of the things, if I may, that the minutes reflect is the board's delegation of authorities to of certain matters to division. It wasn't part of the discussion, but I think it's worth mentioning here that counsel's office has a role this division as its counsel, or counsel to all the programs, including. And so, even though the board has delegated these items to the division, council still has its function as council program to review these matters. So I'll be meeting with Louis to talk about which of those items should be presented to council's office before the division takes action or approves, denies, so that we can continue to do our role, which is separate and apart from the board's role.
Okay. Good. All right. Louis, do you have a division report?
Sure. Couple things, and Tony may actually need your help on this one.
Sure.
Number one, we got our annual mailing out in July 16th, I believe. We've gotten, I don't have the exact number, but we've gotten approximately 250, I think. So, is that right? Where's Alicia? Alicia knows. We've gotten back some submissions already. Maybe I've got the number wrong, but as the last time I got the number, they were running about 50-50 between electronic submissions and paper submissions. I think, unfortunately, the paper number is going to start pulling ahead of the electronic number, because a lot of the people, the more sophisticated people, are the ones doing it first, the ones who can actually get online and do it. We are getting what I would characterize as a steady trickle of calls asking for us to send paper copies of the annual report. And when we get those calls, we try to encourage people either to try it online. I succeeded in one of those earlier this week, or print, or at least get to the public library to a computer and print it out. But there's some cases where that's just not possible for people, and we have been sending some paper copies too. That's ongoing. They're not due until March 31st, if for people who are on a calendar year for filing. But they're still coming in. That was number one. Number two thing is we now have a lot of vacancies in the division. We are now down 2 accountants, plus we are down an assistant director. We are looking to fill those positions. We're waiting for approval from budget to go ahead and start interviewing for those positions. But that's obviously going to impact what we can get done and when we can get it done. We'll obviously have to give priority to anything where we're on a actual statutory or regulatory deadline, but beyond that, 15 people can't do the work of 18 people. So we can come close, but we can't quite get there. So we're going
Superman.
We're going to do that. It appears that I prepared, pursuant to you guys' request from last month, I prepared a very brief report on how we'd be doing annual reporting on our delegated, how we'd be doing reporting on our delegated duties, which things numerically ought to be subject to reporting and which things wouldn't, and for the ones we are going to report to you on, how often we'd report. That got omitted from the board packet. Alicia ran downstairs to get it. So in the meanwhile, I'll mention the thing that I need your help on, Tony, which is either the beginning of this week or the end of last week, one of our cemeteries, White Plains Rural Cemetery, got a favorable decision in the appellate court. The background is that White Plains Rural Cemetery wants to build a crematory. The zoning board of the city of White Plains determined that they had to build, they had to have a variance to build the crematory, and denied them the variance. The cemetery took them to court. The Supreme Court ruled that yes, the city correctly ruled they had to have a variance, but no, the city was outside the bounds of law in saying that they wouldn't get a variance. This got appealed. They got an appellate division decision last week affirming the trial court's decision. Tony, do you want to?
Both grounds. A little disappointing. The first issue was whether whose definition of a cemetery applies, ours in the NPCL or the town's definition in zoning law. And the second department affirmed the Supreme Court and held that they can have their own definition, even though it doesn't match our definition.
And even though in this case,
Yeah.
they didn't actually have a definition
They
of
didn't.
cemetery in the local
Right.
ordinance. The zoning
So-
board just kind of said that.
Right. The issue was our definition, by definition in the NPCL, crematories are included in cemeteries. The Supreme Court and the appellate division said, well, the zoning board doesn't have to follow that definition. That was disappointing. On the other hand, the fact that the hardship that the town demonstrated was sufficient that the town was required to grant the variance, that it was acting arbitrary and capricious in denying it,
Hi, Bob.
is wonderful news for us. And in fact, there are cemeteries that have been denied crematories that might want to go back and look at the dollars and cents proof that this cemetery put in, and if they have similar circumstances, should go back and make a new application based on this decision.
Of course, this really, for us, it only opens the door to an application. I've already asked the cemetery to provide us with updated financials because the financial information they provided us is stale by 2 years now. We will be providing you a report. It'll probably be on, if we get the information in time, this will be on for next month's meeting. If not, it'll be the meeting after, more likely the meeting after. And, we don't obviously have any recommendation right now. We're
On the application itself.
right, because we haven't got a complete application yet. I think it's safe to say that at first blush, it doesn't seem like a bad idea to have more cremation capacity in Westchester County writ large. But I can't speak to any specifics of an application we don't have.
Mount Kisco, that's Westchester County.
They're both in Westchester, so this could get real complicated if they were to go back to the town right now.
So that's an interesting, what I had in mind when I was describing this case is Oakwood Cemetery, Mount Kisco, very almost identical circumstances. Sought to build a crematory, the town denied it based on its own law. It actually amended its zoning law when it found out that the cemetery wanted to build one to deny, to prohibit crematories in cemeteries. That was upheld. Now, what was lacking in that case was, I don't think Oakwood made the dollars and cents proof that this cemetery did. I think if Oakwood is still struggling financially, it could make a new application. I don't think that denial a few years ago would prohibit it from applying again if its conditions.
Of course, to us, this may all look different
Right.
if we approve White Plains Rural for a crematory. On the other hand, Mount Kisco is 25 minutes from White Plains, and it
So that would be an
appeal.
issue. But, that puts the issue in front of the board where it belongs, which is how many crematories do we need in this part of the state?
And is this going to make money, on balance, going to make money for the cemetery? And that's what we're going to be figuring out in the application.
Right.
So that was the good news. And now you have my very short memo on this is solely limited to the issue of reporting on delegated duties. So the things that we already provide monthly reports on are the collection of vandalism and assessment fees. That's in our vandalism report. I'll get to that shortly. And applications for appropriation of a portion of net appreciation. We don't get many of those, but we'll report on those. We haven't, the following things that we've effectively either by custom or by law already have as delegated duties. These really lend themselves to numeric reports, the number of annual reports we review, and a number of rules and regulations we review, the number of service charge applications we review, and the number of reclamation applications we review. We don't really need to report the substance of every rate application. The whole point of delegating to us was not doing that, but we can give you quarterly numbers on this. We already prepare those numbers. That's what we're recommending that we do.
Are you thinking with regard to increasing service charges, letting the board know when service charges that are increased based on the index or increased on other matters, on other basis? Is that something you track?
Currently, no. We'll talk to Ari about figuring out whether we can.
I'm just.
It's not
off the top of my head, I
It's
don't know.
not a bad idea to separate. Well, the thing is, up here,
They don't
The vast
use-
majority are not ECI applications. In the city, the vast majority are. So it might be kind of an unnecessary function. On the other hand, it wouldn't be a terrible thing to see which cemeteries only do ECI year in and year out. We can see what that would involve technically. If it's not a big deal database-wise, it probably makes sense to capture that. So that's just aggregate reporting is what we're proposing to do, not cemetery names, just we reviewed 100 rate applications, we reviewed 100 annual reports, something like that. Next thing, for the use of vandalism funds, I think it probably makes sense to report by cemetery name that we've gone to X cemetery or Y cemetery and verified their use of vandalism fund money. We do that. We have not reported on the follow-up to the board before, but since we're reporting on the collection of fees and since you're approving the applications, it probably makes sense to give you a list saying, during this quarter, we've been to X, Y, and Z cemeteries, we've confirmed their use of funds. That's something we'll do with cemetery names. There are a few things here that we don't think it makes sense to report to the board at all. Requests for extensions, requests when we request that a cemetery provide us with additional information, unless it's pursuant to some kind of investigation, in which case, presumably, this will have been a subject of discussion in executive session. Approval of grave resales owned by funeral directors from back before 1949, and one-off service charges are just things that there's just no reason to report on. So that's our not really, I guess it's not really for your approval. It's
No,
just
I
kind of an
wouldn't.
FYI.
Well,
as to what we're planning
the
on.
point of all of this is just, again, nuts and bolts, to clarify, refresh, affirm what powers have been delegated to the division, and then to have, I think, an iterative process about how the board is then formed as to those are done. So I wouldn't want the board necessarily to say yes or no to this, just having received it. I'd like the board, and we don't have Jill here, and so we can review this. The record should just show that we've received it. It's under review by the board, and we can go back, and it can be changed. We can modify that over time. So
What I'd suggest is wait until April, when you actually get our first report according to this, and see what it actually looks like in practice.
Good,
And if
good.
it doesn't look good enough, then you can always ask us for more.
So again, nuts and bolts, just trying to improve our processes. So.
And this obviously has nothing to do with the issue of whether and to what extent council will have any involvement in applications that come before the division that don't have to go to the board. This is just statistical reporting of what we get done, or non-statistical in one case.
Is there any reporting on complaints registered by the public against cemeteries and cemetery operators?
We have not.
Any summary data on that?
We do gather complaint data. It's in a database that is a little bit clunkier than our main database. I'm pretty sure we can run reports, numeric reports on complaints received. I mean, we do gather that data. I would not want to report on the substance of complaints and the names of cemeteries. If what the board wants is numerical reporting in complaints opened and complaints closed during a period, it's not a delegated function, but I absolutely think we could do that.
Somehow sorted by theme or topic or type or something like
That
that?
gets more. We do gather
That would be helpful to the board, wouldn't it?
We do gather that information in our database. I don't know, as I sit here right now, whether we can run a report that picks that up. I'm guessing we can, but I really don't know if this were in our main access database, I could say with certainty that, subject to Mark's technical whizzes, namely RA taking a look at this, we'd be able to do that. I don't know if that works on our complaint database. I understand what you're saying. It makes sense. I don't know how easy that would be to do.
And we could always follow up with executive session on done information if it triggered something. So.
Right.
Well, again, I think that request should be noted in the minutes, that we're going to take a look at how we inform the board, track and inform the board about complaints, and how that information is transmitted. So that's good.
So the short answer is we can absolutely and will, come April, report on complaints received.
So this should come back up. I mean, April's a good suggestion, so we'll bring it back up in April.
Because then we'll have the first quarter.
Okay. And that you should continue to report these things as you're proposing, because we can modify them.
Right, I don't know, what I don't know is whether we can actually sort them by type. It's a good idea, I just don't know if we can do it.
Yeah, it's a goal.
So I tried to convince Chet to give the vandalism report.
Yeah. Let me just go back though,
Can I cut you?
because we all wear more than one hat, and this deputy secretary, oversee the operations of the division, and so I just want to, the annual mailing and the online mailing, in conjunction with, losing staff, tightening of state budget, they're sort of all the same. I mean, we very much need to recognize that change is a process for us and for our cemeteries. We have plans for training, hand-holding, education for people so we can get them more to the online version as much as possible. We are giving people paper where they need it, so they can comply. But this is how we manage doing the work of 18 with 15, and we're getting much better information. Quality of the data improves over time. It's just, this is the direction that we're going in. But we will work with our cemeteries to make sure that those who have, we've already found that some, once a little hand-holding occurs, they go, oh, this was easier. This worked out. And of course, over time, more and more people are doing things on their phones, let alone on their computers. So it's important we get better data, and it's easier and more accurate, and ultimately, hopefully, we'll have almost all online applications. But we won't stop without transition and acknowledging the change. So
I just want to highlight, since you said it, the better data is really the key point of this. It's not so much the savings of effort for us in reviewing and inputting this stuff. It's that we just simply get better data about cemeteries when we get the online reports, which then in turn will allow us, once the majority are reporting online, to generate much more robust reports about the state of cemeteries in the state.
Okay. And I think one just thing to add, not in the director's report, it's public, but the budget's proposed. It adds. It's basically doubled our vandalism fund allocation. They did it by putting $2 million in a capital fund and no money in the general fund. So it's not only net a additional $1 million. It's again doubling our appropriation. That we already have significant backlog of approved applications, so that'll go fast. Again, who needs staff when all the work's done by April? Kidding.
If that were the only thing we did, yes, we could all go hit the beach and.
So it's good news. It might not be great news, but it's good news.
One other thing I think would be helpful to both you and the board would be to report on processes that are subjected to lean management techniques, because the division of the budget, as I understand it, looks more favorably on waiver applications in areas where lean has been applied.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do that.
We've done that, right?
I'll give you the update on that, which is we did that to the process. I reported on this in December and a little bit in January. We did that in the process of board application preparation to create forms for all of our types of board applications. We've got 2 forms in the works right now, which we thought was sort of the simplest and most basic ones: mausoleum and columbarium construction and major renovations. They required, believe it or not, to get a form to do division required somebody to write JavaScript. That took a while. We're close to done with those. We're hoping to have something to be reviewed by council before it can be disseminated and shown to you guys next month. Once that domino falls, I think it'll be much easier to get the other forms ready to go. This is all part of our lean process, and this will save cemeteries a ton of frustration in hearing from us that X is missing and Y is missing from an application, and save us a ton of time because they will know exactly what is required, and they can always call us, but it'll all be laid out neatly for them with which attachments are needed, which calculations are needed, and applications will come in much closer to done, which, to Mark's point, will allow us to do more with less. This is a major lean function. We're also hoping to We did a sort of a mini lien on the vandalism and assessment, vandalism fund applications, which is why you get that neat little checklist now. We're planning on taking another crack at that to make it more routine and maybe even create an online submission capacity for that, which would also make life less painful for cemeteries and save us time.
That's a great point. The Department of State's big on the lien, we have a lien office, and we've done a lot of work there to improve business process. Because over time, everything gets sort of jumbled, and it's the way you used to do it, and all that.
And
So-
we had success with some of our waiver applications
Yeah.
because of the application of lien.
Yeah,
The demonstration.
yeah, and
that
we've made it clear.
Squeezed out waste in the system.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so, Chet? Oh, this is the first meeting without Chet, but we have the able replacement of...
So, the vandalism and assessment report, we have so far collected $130,000 and change in vandalism fees. Not surprising, those come in during this quarter, so it makes sense that it's a very low number. Our appropriation for this fiscal year is $939,000. Like Mark said, we're hoping that will be much more next year. Applications granted exceed our appropriation, is 1.59 million. It exceeds our appropriation by about $650,000. The hope now is that we will have money to pay people that come April, sometime shortly after April 1st. There is 1.5 million or so pending in applications. That does not mean that we will necessarily recommend granting of 1.5 million in applications. The number always goes down because we find things that aren't properly within that. On the ones that are pending, anything that's pending, it's because we're waiting for additional information from the cemetery. There's nothing that's just sitting on our desk right now. We have, of the applications granted this year, all but 2 were for restoration of dangerous monuments, 1.2 million and change, and just under 350,000 for abandonment. The bigger of those being the town of New Windsor taking over Newburgh Woodlawn Cemetery.
So we've granted that $330,000 to the town of New Windsor.
Which is only a portion of their application on that.
And the second part is the pending?
Yes.
Because it's the same order?
Yes, yes, so
Okay.
so what we granted was the dangerous monuments, because they're dangerous. What's left are their requests for money to repair roads, and for certain equipment, we've kind of gone back and forth with them a couple of times on the equipment issue. The roads seem more or less in order. But the roads, while bumpy, are not a life safety issue.
Well, they're concerned about the total of the two
Yeah,
in terms of the big
Indeed.
picture. It's approaching the total, at least almost the total amount.
it's a very
allocated, right?
large cemetery.
So what happens there?
It's a problem. We have the same problem up in Oswegatchie. That's also a very large
Has
abandonment.
there been any discussion of a separate standalone fund for abandonment?
No.
What there be?
Well, I don't know. Money's green, so if they did a separate fund for abandonment, it would probably come out of the same.
Or increase the amount?
Well,
It's in this
there's
fund,
been a lot of
or
discussion about
that's-
increasing the amount.
That would have to be,
Yeah.
I mean, the size of these applications are really large,
Yeah,
and they
I think-
swamp the restorations.
That's, there's trends. It's always difficult to predict the future, but it's clear that there's trends. The size of the, particularly in abandonments, is where the increase
Well,
has come.
We actually did some analysis of this. I'll give you a very brief summary of it. Point number 1 is that the trend increase in vandalism fund payments is mostly to restore dangerous monuments. There is an increase in abandonments that is definitely a trend, but there is no trend in an increase in large abandonments. We've just happened to have gotten a few at least we haven't identified such a trend yet. We happen to have gotten a few of those in the last couple of years. So while abandonments are definitely on balance up, they mostly don't generate very large numbers. It's when you have a 58-acre cemetery in the town or Whispering Maples with 2 mausoleum buildings in a not particularly good state of repair, that's going to be a huge hit. But most abandoned cemeteries are small local cemeteries where you might have a few dangerous monuments and you might have a little bit of maintenance to be done. They don't tend to be.
I guess in the
The
big
real
picture-
driver of the trend is the dangerous monument application.
Yes, and my concern is that the ability of the state to address those dangerous monuments and protect the health and safety of the people of New York is compromised when you have a cap on the amount of money that you have to spend, and so much of it is being
Yeah.
allocated or dedicated to abandonments. I'm not saying anything you guys don't know, but
Yep.
it seems like there ought to be a contingency plan in place, and I don't know what that would be or how that would be generated or even initiated. But I think it's worthy
Yeah.
of future
I
conversation.
pointed it out before that of the three analyses, vandalism, dangerous, and abandonment, the only one that includes a financial analysis is abandonment, which would indicate that the one that the board is most able to deny based on the financial ability to pay, especially if funds have been received, are the abandonment ones. It's very difficult to deny. I don't think the board could deny a vandalism application, let's say, because it happens to come from a cemetery with a lot of money or a dangerous monument. Abandonment, there's a financial analysis.
We certainly have looked at, for dangerous monuments in particular, but also for vandalism, coming up with cheaper ways of addressing things. So we will not necessarily approve if we can find a cheaper solution that's still acceptable, that's what we're going to recommend you guys approve, and not necessarily, which isn't always what the cemetery wants. But there's only so much that can do to control costs.
Yep.
Obviously, we would like more money. One thing that we've talked about several times, both internally and here, is there a way to identify monuments that are more dangerous than others? And for the most part, the answer is no, there isn't. Monuments falling are generally a small risk of a catastrophic event. And once something is off its base, you don't know who's going to be pushing it or what's going to run into it or what have you. The only prioritization one can really do with that is dangerous monuments that are right along a road are more likely to fall on someone than dangerous monuments in an area that doesn't get that much traffic. But even that's a very rough approximation, because one person taking a shortcut through the woods, through the back of the cemetery, could end up hitting that one monument and with catastrophic results.
Right. Well, good discussion on that, and again, we do have an increase in our proposed. But like most things, it's not terribly
I
sufficient.
have another question on the restoration. This past year has been particularly wet, and there's been ground saturation all over the area here, and people are complaining about basements flooding. Has there been an increase in the number of monuments that have been reported as dangerous or leaning or somehow posing a hazard because that might be attributable to this kind of weather event?
I'm going to defer to Mike on this one.
I think there's been an increase, but I don't know that it's been tied to that. No one has, commented that was the issue.
Is the base generally deep enough to withstand that type of saturation?
They vary. I mean, some of the very old ones, a lot of the ones don't have a base. They dug a hole and they put a bunch of cobblestones in, and it was good for 100 years. And, freeze, thaw, wet, whatever. Once they start moving, that generally accelerates.
Yeah.
I would imagine the wet year would do that.
I've seen it with flooding, have cemetery of Schoharie County after it was a
Yeah.
Katrina, when the storm affected areas this far north, one cemetery had major flooding and it knocked over quite a few stones. So in that kind of a scenario, it may happen, but just under ordinary wet ground saturation, and it would probably take a lot for that. It's more, as Mike said, for the frost and heave that would allow a monument to shift in its base.
Most of the ones that are submitted and that we approve, or if the case is denied, they're at least 50 years old, more like 75 or 100 years old. Mm-hmm. So they've been there. So whatever the foundation was has had 1,000 pounds sitting on it for 75. So it's pretty well settled. So it's not an issue where the ground saturation is causing them to settle more. They're already pretty well settled down to.
And does a sea level rise pose any threat to cemeteries that are near coastal areas of the state?
Be mostly Long Island, I would think.
There's at most a handful. The only one that comes to mind right now is Pelham Cemetery in the Bronx, which is right on Eastchester Bay.
What about like river communities, like Binghamton?
I don't know whether sea level rise affects
Yeah.
water levels on the river. I mean, I know Riverhurst, right? And
No, we
in
had, there
Endwell?
was a cemetery in Tioga County that had suffered some issues due to river flooding near the back of the cemetery.
wasn't that Riverhurst in
Skyway.
Broome County that was underwater with the Irene back in 2011?
Yeah.
There was a
The
big
rear
chunk of
part.
the cemetery that was underwater. Poughkeepsie Rural has problems too in a couple
They
places.
got hit by the last hurricane, Irene. They got money from our federal government to repair their stone.
So I'd say that cemeteries along rivers are suffering from increased severe weather. I'm not sure if it's sea level rise so much
Climate
as
change.
more storms.
It seems that there are things going on to protect residential areas, to beef up the resistance of shorelines to flooding from that type of hurricanes and other types of events that might swamp those areas. But for cemeteries, that might not be part of the conversation yet, and maybe it ought to be.
I mean, I'm not sure there's anything unique to cemeteries there if you're going to be, if you've got frontage on the sea.
I'm just afraid they'll be
Knowing-
overlooked because there's nobody living
Knowing
there.
absolutely nothing about that side of the program,
Yeah, who's advocating
I
for
would
it?
think you're looking at the whole shoreline and not just particular parts. But that would be another piece of our office, no?
Well, it's the impact on the community to have a cemetery disturbed by flooding. That's
Yeah.
It's no, Troy's going to be a waterfront community soon.
And it depends how many boats come floating down the river, right?
Yeah, that's a big deal. All right, so we have three applications, Finland applications?
Yep. We have Graceland, we have Vale, and we have Wiltwick. They are unfortunately all vandalism. I know, Tony, you had a question about Graceland, and I think Len can answer it.
yeah. The statute requires that the cemetery has to first try to obtain funds from the lot owner, and usually that's done through publication. But I understand in this case there was no publication; that there was a direct communication between the two families of the
Right.
people who were buried. They keep
Yeah, the cemetery had kind of reached out to the families and told them it was their responsibility because they owned the monuments, but they claimed to not have the funds to repair it, so that's why the cemetery submitted the application.
Do you know who from the cemetery reached out to the families?
The manager, Holly Mill.
Okay. So I think in future, just like we would normally have the publication as part of the packet, if there's direct communication, that should be part of the report in detail about, especially because sometimes homeowners insurance would cover
Right.
something like that.
In this case, they did, neither of them had the homeowner's insurance. They asked them, that was the first thing they asked, for insurance to cover it. And they didn't. I asked for a written statement regarding that, and they haven't sent it, so
Okay.
Well, if you could follow up and get that for the file, that'd be great.
Okay.
Any other discussions about these three applications for vandalism funds?
Yeah, on Vale, I noticed there was no police report filed. That was intentional on the part of the
Well,
cemetery operator.
Vale is had so many instances of vandalism every year. It seems like they get hit with vandalism, and they have filed police reports in the past, and sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. In this case, they didn't. I think that they got this year mixed up with another year on their letter that said they filed a police report when in fact they did not. They didn't want to file a police report because it can sometimes have adverse consequences with the publicity generated from the ad in the paper can invite more vandalism, so that's why they chose not to file a police.
That and
The newspapers pick up on police reports, and they'll sometimes do a story on it, and that,
I
Doesn't
don't
it
know
seem
if
that there
you
ought to
were
be a
on-
report to the police,
I don't know
even
if
if they don't publicize it?
I don't know if you were on the board
The
yet,
statutes.
but there was a discussion of this at the board level with respect to Vail. There was one discussion before either you or I got here, but then there was another one, I want to say it was right around the time you got on the board, of this very issue. And the board chair at the time said that, we understood why they weren't doing it and was okay with
so
it.
just to be clear, this is in compliance with statute. 1507H52 says the cemetery either provides a written report shows that a written report of the vandalism was filed with the local police or sheriff's department, or that the cemetery, upon consent of the division, made a determination not to file the report because the publicity generated by filing a report would have adverse consequences.
Case closed.
Right, but this comes up mostly with respect to Vail.
They have filed in the past, though. That's why in the letter, which I assume you're referring to from the cemetery, they said they filed a police report when in fact they did not. Maybe they were thinking of, they get vandalized so much. It's a constant battle they have over there. People walk through, it's right in the middle of the city, and then they get vandalized every year.
There's no intervention.
It's, well,
They have
one
cameras,
thing,
They have cameras,
they have-
the police patrol, but
with their budget, they're pretty much doing everything they can, given their financial constraints. I mean, one of the issues they have is that kids use the cemetery as a shortcut to get to and from school, and most of them are fine, but if you're just walking along and there's a monument that's a little bit loose and you push on it, there you go.
The implication is that we have to keep paying for that, out of the fund,
Yeah.
interminably,
Therefore.
right?
I mean-
Yeah, but
It's an interesting question as to whether they could apply to the fund. If there was some type of security measure that would prevent vandalism, is there an interpretation of the fund that would allow us to pay for that to prevent it? I don't know, but I'm not sure there is such a magic bullet, because if there was, then we'd be having this conversation. I don't think there is.
I would also point out that years ago, the vast majority of applications were for vandalism. There would be maybe a dozen a year.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen that. The reason that there are 3 here, that's a bit of a fluke. And they do stretch back over time because they were vandalisms and they weren't health and safety issues. So we didn't really rush to get these on. But overall, vandalism is less, even at Val vandalism.
So I was curious, I mean, can't they, if that's the situation and it's going on over time, isn't there a way to block off that part of the cemetery that is out of sight and out of view of the police and others that pass by, so that, I mean, we've got a history of a problem here that,
there's several entrances. They do have, I believe the back entrances are closed, the gates are closed, but they find a way, the kids, they cut across and it's not a great area of town, and they just, it's hard to monitor every person that goes in there, and especially at night,
Yeah.
they can't prevent.
And in many places, their fence is a 36-inch chain link fence.
And you have to keep in mind that, the countervailing interest is in giving access to families.
Tell David well, maybe we're not. We're having AV problems. I'm not sure what the issue is. So this
We may lose our record.
critical discussion.
We have
Have a
David's
tape.
backup recording
Yeah.
device.
Okay.
Not meeting the open meetings law.
No,
Right. I know,
technical
I know.
difficulties presumably doesn't.
Any other questions about the 3 requests for vandalism funds?
I have none.
So, you have.
I have orders.
Well, let me just see the 3 are Graceland for the amount of $300, is that right?
Yeah. So with Graceland, they were able, the original request was to replace the monuments. The monument dealer was actually able to repair the monuments at 1/10 of the cost of replacement.
Has that work been done? Did it work out all right?
It's done.
Yeah.
Are-
They went ahead and did it.
It looks good as far as I can tell. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I mean, I didn't think that the replacement was necessary. They could repair it as well as he did, so.
Was this a hate crime? Was this racially motivated?
Well, yeah, I don't know if the police have determined that, but, you know, it appeared that somebody, when there was some kind of a torch, you know, and then maybe a big lighter or maybe a propane torch, and they scorched the image on the monument. And so, you know, will that happen again? It may, and maybe at that point, you know, the monument will need to be totally replaced. But I feel like in this case, they did an adequate job of repairing it.
Not to jinx us, but Graceland doesn't exactly have a history of vandalism. It's not like they're getting hit.
So I have making a motion here, so for free Graceland for around $300, Vale Cemetery in the amount of $8,158.28, and Wiltwyck Rural Cemetery in Ulster County for the amount of $6,783.45. I'll make that motion.
Pending availability of
Pending
funds.
availability of funds. Thank you very much.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
I've got stuff for you guys to sign. We can do it in a break too if you like.
We're moving on to
Oakwood.
applications. Oakwood Cemetery in Niagara County.
Mike or Joe, do you want to just take the lead on this? No, Brandon, you can do it.
Oakwood Cemetery is in the city of Niagara Falls. They have an existing crematory. It's one oil-fired retort in an old receiving wall chapel building that's inadequate for the purpose. The retort is no longer in good repair. It's functionally obsolete.
To give you an idea of what this looks like, I think I last visited that crematory, I think it was in 2015. I think I have gained enough weight since then that I would not be able to get around the retort to the back where it is swept out. The space is really, really, really tight.
Yeah,
It's
it's the
creepy.
size of a, excuse me, a small coat closet, really. You know, they don't have room to have a real temporary storage area for bodies. So it's just, it's a building that, number one, is not suited for that purpose, and number two, would better be suited for a different purpose. So they have proposed to build a small building nearby to house a new retort. And they're seeking cemetery board approval for that cemetery renovation in addition to a permanent maintenance loan to fund it.
They originally had come in and they had actually taken out a bank loan without telling us first. The bank loan was at 6%. We said, you got to be kidding. And they paid off the bank loan and are proposing to take money out of their permanent maintenance fund instead because 6% was way more than they'd ever make on investments, which is craziness. The project will ultimately make money for the cemetery, number one. And number two, they really have no choice. This retort is probably decades past its usable lifespan, as is the building. And the crematory is, in some ways, the cemetery's lifeline. Just to give you a little bit of background on the cemetery, they had a misappropriation of funds, I think it was about 10 years ago. And a new volunteer board came in and was really taking dramatic steps to improve the physical condition and the financial position and the presence of the cemetery in the community. For a completely volunteer-run cemetery, they actually do some really excellent programming there to get people in. It's not in a particularly fancy part of town, and so whatever they can do to make the place look better which they've done, is impressive. They've also all but, I think they have a year left to go, Joe. They've all but paid off a previous permanent maintenance deficit.
Well, how much are they paying a year, do you know?
I think it was 16,000.
Yes, I think it's 16,667.
16,500.
16,500.
That's good news.
Yeah, and they have been compliant and current in all of those payments throughout.
So my concern was that this new crematory isn't going to improve their income much.
Well,
but it will reduce their expenses.
Right, it will because it reduces their expenses.
In addition, DEC signaled that they're gonna revamp their regs and their old unit will no longer be grandfathered in. Originally, I think they said within 2 years. I don't know when that's gonna happen, but when that does happen, they won't be able to use the existing retort.
Right. Oh, I know, DEC has changed the rules.
There's discussion.
Yeah.
Nothing has happened yet. There's
Oh,
just
that's true.
discussion.
It was comment period, right?
No, they haven't even gone to comment period. They got, they haven't proposed it yet. They did pre-comments.
Okay.
They invited pre-comments so that,
Okay.
with the eye to the comment period going more smoothly.
But we know it's coming.
Well, we don't know when it's coming.
Right. So the reason I bring that up, the cemetery had net income, very low net income these last 2 years. Excuse me.
It's me, I'm calling him.
How dare you? Let's see, where's the net income? Expenses net, here we go. It was 26,000 last year, 16,000 the year before. The payback on the PM loan is 24,000. And I was hoping to generate a discussion by the board about, well, how are they going to pay for this? Because it's not going to, their income isn't going to go up. As a
How much of that is going to be
Some of
savings
these-
right
some
up
of these
front?
costs, like depreciation, are just book
Well,
entries.
since their payback of the PM deficit ends in 2 years, why not start this payment in 2 years when that payment ends?
I'm sure they would be delighted with that suggestion. I have no problem with that. I
They're
didn't.
not making that 16,000 payment.
Then it's easy to
That makes
afford this
it much
between
more affordable.
between their cost savings and
Right.
eliminating that, and hopefully, maybe they will be able to increase revenue because the machine won't be down as often.
So they'll accumulate 2% interest for those 2 years.
If the board's okay with that, we're obviously fine with that.
I think they submitted their petition, didn't they already?
They have
It's a draft petition.
I don't think it's
Draft.
gone to court.
No, we always, after, I forget which cemetery it was that went to court before coming to us. After that, we always tell them, don't go to court yet.
That seems reasonable. So the suggestion is to modify the approval, meaning that they would borrow from their PM fund and start paying, accrue interest on that for 2 years, but not delay the payment until they pay off that other loan to improve their cash flow.
I'll find out what the exact date is.
I mean,
why
we
don't
don't
we do
have to accrue the interest either. I mean, the interest it's them paying themselves.
Well, it's good for the PM. We could also, since we don't have the cemetery here, do it
We can call
permissive. Or we could do it permissive, that they can start the payments right away, or they can wait 2 years.
Okay,
They
that
would-
makes sense.
That makes sense too.
And since this is subject to your final review of the petition anyway,
Right.
they can deal with that when they give you the payment, or they can give you a revised payment schedule.
So I would move.
I have
Go
a
ahead.
couple questions first.
Sure.
First is that I don't see board minutes approving the project. Shouldn't that have been included as part of this package?
I don't see them either, and you're correct. Did you?
I recall seeing them, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe that whatever they sent us was submitted.
Well, if you saw them, that's good enough, but we won't. We'll make sure they're in there.
One of the reasons I asked is a sign required? Because on the other applications, a sign is required. Not in this case? Okay.
That's for Mausoleum of Columbarium
All right.
construction.
And also, in some of the documentation, like in the, I'm confused as to whether they're borrowing $251,000 or $400,000, because on the court order it says $400,000, and on the memo it says $251,000 against their permanent maintenance fund.
Changed because they're not doing the bank loan. They were splitting it up. Now it's all coming from PM, right?
So
It's a
which is
larger
it?
loan.
It's the 400.
It's the 400?
400.
So this is,
Right.
all right. And also, I was looking for the board minutes because I was trying to determine whether there was a quorum present when it was approved by the cemetery.
Without the, I can only speak from our experience of this cemetery. Their board is very active. It would strike me as bizarre that they did not have a quorum of their board at any point, because the group they have is extremely involved. And Brendan saw the minutes. If they're minutes,
I don't know,
then they
yeah,
would've-
I don't know if it's a deal breaker or not. I'm just asking a question as to whether or not.
We
ought
should
to
include the
get them
minutes.
And make sure that there was, and maybe make, if we approve, contingent upon determination that the board, there was a quorum present at the meeting. where
You
this was
you
approved,
could
right?
make it subject to our confirmation that, subject to review,
That they
receipt and review of board minutes.
can demonstrate appropriate board approval.
Yeah, that's right.
The 251,000 figure was also in the memo to you
Okay, we'll
from
fix that.
the president, chairman, and Oakwood.
Right, again,
trustees.
their documents.
Right.
It's our bad for having the 250 in the cover memo. What they did was they didn't redo all their documents when they changed the method of application.
Right.
And I didn't want them to do that because, like I said, these guys are all volunteers. They're not, they don't have all the time in the world to do this.
And the last thing I have is in the financial statements, I noticed that in 2016, $28,995 operating expense to the Heritage Foundation. Is that something that's permitted for not-for-profit corporations?
Any idea what that is? I was wondering about that too. I didn't make note of it.
I'm not sure what that is.
If-
That's their foundation, right? That's their
No.
501c3.
No,
No?
no, the Heritage Foundation is a public think tank, very conservative-oriented political think tank. Politically
Are you
oriented.
sure that that's that Heritage Foundation and
It could be
not like?
misreported.
I think
hope
it's
it's
the
misreported.
Oakwood. I think that's because I am pretty sure, I'm 99, 44, 100% sure the cemetery is an active 501c3 Friends of group. It could be called the Oakwood Cemetery Heritage Foundation.
Can we look into that?
I'll ask.
Do you want them to report back to the board?
I think they should.
Obviously, don't.
I don't want to make an assumption that it's okay if it wasn't. I don't know if it's permitted or not.
Wouldn't think so if it was that particular.
Yeah.
So where's that leave us? I think I still would say that that's a side issue that we should follow up on. Motion to approve the Oakwood.
Can I ask one more
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
There was a 2% and there was a 2.5% interest.
2%.
It is 2%? So in this,
The final schedule in the petition that's going to be submitted for council's review will reflect $400,000 at 2%.
and on the court order, there's just a typo that needs to be dealt with. The one line is repeated from the first page to the back.
But they're going to have to revise
that.
it to make sure that it has the possibility of a 2-year delay, 2%, 400,000, to make sure everything's in order anyway. So
Okay.
we can point that out to them.
So I'll make a motion to approve the application of Oakwood with the contingency that we put the minutes of the meeting, board minutes approving that project in the packet, we get them in the file, and that we make sure that there was sufficient governance or board quorum for that action. That the cemetery is permitted to start the repayment of the PM loan of $400,000, if that's not the right figure, is that $400,000 from their PM loan at 2% interest that could begin at when they pay off their other loan in approximately 2 years, and subject to council review of the final petition.
Let me just
Subject to court approval.
Right, let me just clarify.
Court
So we're actually doing two things here. You are approving the major renovation.
Yeah.
Subject to division verification that the board properly acted to approve this, their board.
Yes.
And subject to council's, period, full stop. And recommending court approval of a PM loan at $400,000 at 2% interest that could start no later than
Repayment that could start.
repayment could start no later than the completion of the repayment of their existing permanent maintenance deficit, subject to confirmation of valid board action council's review of the petition, because that's a recommendation to the Supreme Court. That's separate. We're not actually approving the PM loan.
And are we looking into the Heritage Foundation contribution a side issue?
I would ask,
Yeah, I would
I
say,
would ask
yeah.
that you not include that there, but we will look at it.
But we should definitely do that. So the motion's on that table?
If that was a contribution, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We should explore that. So, second,
Second.
that we're clear about the path of that? All in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Motion
All right.
carries.
Thank you.
Riverhurst Memorial in Broome County to Columbarium.
The next three things we have here are pretty straightforward prefab columbarium applications. Brennan, this is you again.
Yep, Riverhurst Cemetery is in the town of Union, Broome County. They've got several mausoleums. This is going to be their first columbarium unit. They received targeted donations to install a columbarium. That's how they're paying for it. It's going to have 144 acres. They plan to have more columbariums if this is successful. There are no regulated cemeteries that have columbarium units in Broome County, so this will be the first.
Vestal doesn't have one?
Yeah.
Wow.
So they're seeking approval of this cemetery recommendation to install that columbarium.
Is this the second largest cemetery in Broome County?
Probably.
So and they've got donations, so there's no loan or.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a very inexpensive unit anyhow. It's-
Donations exceed the project by about $11,000.
Are these true donations? They're not prepays?
No, they were
They're gifts.
fundraiser that they, for this project.
Okay, great.
Going to take the three in as a percent, or do you want to do each individually?
Individually.
Okay.
No, so, you
So-
have anything on this one?
Are there any other questions about Riverhurst Memorial's application?
I have an observation on all three. One thing Division has usually provided when it's a project that's supposed to make money is, and there's a cost, is a spreadsheet that shows the income, the expense year over year, and the pay down of the cost or the debt. And I don't see that in any of these applications. I know we're going to a more formalized, standardized way of reporting, but I hope that spreadsheet is not going to be excluded, that we're going to have that going forward.
We have an income and expense that we didn't break it down by year.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't show when
Our
they've paid off either.
Our draft form does have a payoff date in it. Remember the division I was telling you about that they had to write JavaScript for? That was part of it. Paul, you have something else?
Any other questions on
Yes. Let's see, it's page 3, number 8. It says the cemetery posted construction notices on October 9, 2018. However, they did not list the last date which comments will be accepted and did not contain a rendering of the proposed unit. A copy of that sign is attached. I spoke to Tony Scarani, who indicated that a proper sign would be posted and indicated that comments will be accepted for 60 days. Will that be part of the approval if we approve this?
Yes, it should be. Conditioned on.
Conditioned on-
reposting the sign.
They have reposted already, haven't they? Wait,
Wait,
this is not, is this one? That's
Oh,
not
I'm
the-
sorry, I jumped ahead. I jumped ahead to
I
Heartland.
thought
I'm
the
sorry.
Outlet had reposted the sign.
But we're taking these separately, right?
Yes.
Right.
So
You were-
let's, finish with
So
River.
let's finish with this.
Any other questions about Riverhurst?
No.
I have a motion to approve the Riverhurst Memorial application to get a columbarium.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to Heartland Cemetery, another in Niagara County.
This is the one I was referring to.
Okay. Holly's in the field. I don't know. Mike, do you know?
Yeah, I spoke to the attorney. So this is I believe they have 3 current columbariums. This is a new one, 48 inch. It's interesting, it's panel. They're very hopeful. Basically what they're doing, they're starting a new columbarium section, cluster type thing. I spoke to the attorney last week, and they had posted the sign, and they sent us the rendering of it.
So now we're just waiting for the 60 days for the new sign to expire.
The discussion was that they couldn't start before the 60 days due to weather anyway, and they would notify us if there were any comments.
I had some questions on Heartland Financial. I think the discussion of the repayment of the loan is a little off. It's a $24,500 loan to be paid over 10 years with 3% interest. The payment should be, based on that, $2,830.40, but what's been submitted is that the payments will be $2,500. So either it's miscalculation or there's a balloon.
There is a miscalculation. This was our first attempt to have them fill out one of these, and when I did the calculation, I discovered that, yeah, it was 2,800.
Okay.
But they've done well with these in the past, and their inventory's low. It's got a decent return.
A more substantial question is what's going on financially with this cemetery?
That's what we're gonna find out. I did have losses, and I talked to Chris out in Syracuse, and we're gonna pull a file and audit them.
Just so we're clear on the record, the application includes a 4-year analysis. In all 4 years, they had losses over $10,000. Their general funds have shrunk from $102,000 to $47,000. This looks like a cemetery. If it keeps losing $10,000 a year, it's going to have no money in 4 years. And I don't know that this is going to. They've already had coronavirus case, so this is just going to maintain a level of income that they're used to. This isn't going to increase their income, maybe a little bit if they have new, better space to sell.
It's pops, yeah. It's
But
possible.
generally, this isn't going to. It's going to stop them from losing income, but it's not going to increase income.
They have 144 niches total, and there's only 15 left to sell, so they do have demand for the niches.
I'm just not sure if they're not charging enough, or the expenses don't look unreasonable, but we're gonna have to do.
They have reduced their expenses, in fact.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a thorough analysis on this to see, why they're having these yearly losses.
You know what their rental house expenses are about?
I did ask her. I believe there is a home on the property.
Wait, where's the line item?
Is there rental income?
Rental house expense.
Yeah, well, there haven't been any in the last 2 years. I'm assuming it's maintenance
There
then.
might be. One of these had rent income. There is a
Rent,
income.
rent.
9,000.
Rental income.
Right.
These are 15 and 16.
It looks, I mean, those look like,
That's unusual.
but given what you're looking at, given that those are big expenses in 1 year, it looks like, you have to ask them, but it looks like they'd have to do work on the house in those 2 years, because there's zero expenses in the last 2 years. So maybe they had to do the roof or something like that.
I don't believe so, no.
So the rent income is from the house.
Which, in the past, usually haven't been a good idea.
Well, depends who they're, partly depends who they're renting to.
They're also on their worksheet for proposed columbarium units. They checked off on item 20 that there have been notices concerning the proposed columbarium posted in the immediate proximity of the proposed columbarium and cemetery office. So that would be incorrect.
No, they posted the notice. The notice didn't contain everything required by the statute, so then they reposted.
Thank you.
It's by the regulations, not the statute. Sorry.
So, I would move we approve the application from Heartland Cemetery for the columbarium.
And this would also be a recommend approval of the PM loan. Right?
Correct. Which will be
Right.
subject to your review of the petition.
And on the new
And
numbers, not the numbers that are in the.
Correct.
And it's contingent also upon the posting.
Contingent on.
Proper sign would be posted.
Contingent on division, cemetery submission and division review of any comments they've received during the 60-day period, now that they have posted the correct sign. We've done that before. Okay? They never get any comments.
So I'll make that motion.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Green Lawn.
Green Lawn Cemetery in Onondaga County, another columbarium application.
Green Lawn Cemetery is a memorial park. They have garden mausoleums with actual prints. And as a part of that, like on one side, they would have a bank of niches. And they've actually been quite successful in selling them. So this is the first freestanding columbarium that doesn't actually have crypt space. But of the, let's see, 144 niches available, there's 139 are sold. So they're down to 5 niche spaces. This is actually pretty large columbarium, 96 niches. They're going to pay for out of the general fund, but they also have a line of credit that goes to them as necessary.
I'm sorry,
Line of credit.
Line
They
of
have a line
credit.
of credit if they need it.
What is the total cost?
$83,270.
And on their September 10 memo, it said the foundation walkway would bring cost of the columbarium to $90,000.
Yeah, we had some discussion back and forth, and that was based on estimates. I talked to Chris, and that 82 or that 83 was the final number.
Okay, and on their general meeting minutes, that's part of the package, there's a very brief reference to the project, and I believe it's the same project. It will be $68,000. So does that mean that the board actually approved a $68,000 project, and it's now kind of morphed into a $86,000 or whatever? And what-
The 68,000 was just for the columbarium.
So did they approve the larger project?
I don't
Board.
know. I don't know if they ever met. I don't have any proof that they met after that and approved a larger number.
I don't know that there's any requirement, Tony can chime in on this, that they approve the associated work as opposed to the cost of the columbarium. I mean, they don't-
Really?
we don't need a special board approval if they don't lay a sidewalk.
Well,
One would like to see
It
the
is
whole
a
project
project.
cost
Yeah.
included.
Right.
yeah, the board shouldn't, we wouldn't want the board to be misled on the total cost of the project.
Right. And there's also no evidence of a vote or a quorum. Let's see, was there quorum present?
Yeah.
Yes, quorum in
Yeah,
attendance
and
with the board
that's-
members. Okay.
that's-
But there was no evidence in the minutes that it was approved. Mike Sargis reported the project cost will be $68,000, which is one half down.
We
from
could
what the
get
building start.
confirmation of this.
We can get a resolution based on the final numbers.
Yeah, that's, I like the way you stated that, Mike. If they didn't properly present it to the board, then do a resolution that the board's members can individually sign rather than require them to have a new meeting.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, great pickups. So, again, this is a columbarium being financed by
It's by the
the general
itself,
fund.
No PM.
no PM
Correct.
fund. And with a caveat that we get confirmation that the project was fully disclosed and properly approved. Anything else that needs to be added to that?
That's it.
I'll make that motion.
With the resolution. That's
Yeah, I
uncovered.
think
That's what I
That would be
meant with
one
the,
to cover.
with the confirmation that the project was approved.
No, I have nowhere. Nothing else.
I made the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Last is Chenango Valley Cemetery in Broome, a merger, and that's going to be brief because we're going to go into executive session to discuss that further. So Tony, do you want to tee that up?
Well, hold on, let's,
Yeah, sure.
do you, Dave, do you want Joe to be?
Well, we can, if we have specific issues that he has to address, so I'm just confused as to What provision are they going into executive session for discussion?
So, all right, let me explain. So Forest Lawn has merged with other cemeteries. They've all been in Erie County where the principal cemetery is located, where they were formed. This one is a proposal to merge with a cemetery in Broome County near Binghamton. It's about a 3.5-hour trip away. We've never seen something like this. There are legal issues raised just as an overall, cemeteries are a local creature. There's lot owner rights, meetings, notice. When a cemetery becomes abandoned, it gets abandoned to the town it's in. So there's a whole host of issues of merging cemeteries of this great distance. So I've let Louis and Mark know that I was going to ask that we go into executive session to hash out the legal issues before they discuss the merits of the application. And I noticed that in the publication in Forest Lawn, when it gave notice to its members, to its lot owners about this merger, that it noticed proposed mergers with other cemeteries, including one in Saratoga. So it's not just a one-off. It looks like the plan is to merge with other cemeteries that are not in Erie County, Wyoming County, Saratoga County, Broome County. So we need to understand the implications of that and talk about the legal issues that are involved, and that's an executive session discussion. I'm not predicting where it'll all come out, but the board needs to hear those issues.
I mean, there are also, I think, after the legal issues, there are policy issues that would, I think, be appropriately addressed in open session, like, is there an issue with creating a cemetery that is too big to fail? Is there a policy issue, assuming the legal issues can be resolved, is there a policy issue with a merger of a cemetery that's several hundred miles away? Even if there's legal issues. Of course, there are countervailing considerations. The board has not, the current board of the cemetery has not been successfully managing it. Forest Lawn has a plan to show that it, at least on the expense and investment side, can significantly improve the position. And the town does not want to end up with the cemetery being abandoned to it. So there are obviously countervailing policy considerations, but we don't even get to that until we get to the legal issues. And the resolution of the legal issues might affect what the policy issues there are.
That's fine. I just have a problem that, honestly, to be very direct, that those legal discussions are entered into an executive session which have public policy ramifications when the full picture of whatever the potential questions might be are not even directed to the cemetery, and it's an assumption. This cemetery has not hidden anything about what their intentions are. Their cluster model has been discussed with all of their board members, and that's what this is about. It's about clustering cemeteries in different locations to maximize benefit for all of the cemeteries. They have a very detailed plan, which they've shared with everyone involved in the process thus far. They have addressed internally their proposals for remote administration as well as remote lot owner participation, which includes video links with the Wint Center, which is the big center at Forest Lawn, with staff present so that the folks who are lot owners in remote areas would be able to participate in those lot owner meetings. They will have staff available, and in fact, the remote cemetery mergers and not just mergers, but supervision are well known to the division, and I would point out that I'm doing some right now just by the receiver of Whispering Maples is quite a distance from Plattsburgh, who is actually doing a fantastic job monitoring and managing that cemetery. There are a number of items that they would be happy to talk to the cemetery board, either directly through a call with them or through me. I have a number of items that I'd be happy to talk about, but I think that they have a financial model which makes sense. They're not talking about utilizing their staff from Forest Lawn to keep shipping 3.5 hours away. There is staff at this cemetery, which will be reduced, but will become a principal location for other cemeteries in the area that are interested in being part of a cluster model, which has been a discussion at the board level for years, as well as with the different organizations, and the fact that the reality is that revenue is going down, expenses are going up, cemeteries are looking for ways to maintain themselves and continue. And to Mr. Polishek's position, Shenango Valley is not in a long-term situation where they are going to continue abandonment of the municipality.
Let me ask, just sort of a.
By the way, just for the record,
David Fleming representing Forest Lawn.
right, representing Forest Lawn, thank you very much. I don't know what we're capturing here, but
It seems like it's kind of going.
yeah, we got at least
Let me ask you with sort of an obvious question, I think, which is, obviously, our regulations provide for management agreements between cemeteries. Those don't even need to go to the board. We review those. It's an obvious possibility, which is something short of merger, would be Forest Lawn managing this one. Clearly, these are smart guys. They considered and rejected this. I'm curious.
I'd like to interrupt that, though, because I really don't, first, I'm not exactly sure where you started. I have no objection to the public discussion of this, but I think there's, and again, board long before me, and since the idea of finding modernization ways to manage cemeteries to promote efficiency, to prevent abandonment is one of our goals. Again, I don't think there's any prejudice here. It's a matter of understanding potential things which should be ultimately discussed in public as well, right? So, am I capturing your concern here? It's not with prejudice. It's not.
No, my concern is that I just don't want the board to operate in a vacuum without having the facts, and to make assumptions based on what impressions are of an application when there's an applicant who's more than happy to engage and communicate. This is not a secret. This application was submitted in October of last year on a process that we've been working with division staff, that we have cemeteries coming to us saying, we're not going to make it. You have a really good operation. Some of those cemeteries have been in Buffalo. Some of those cemeteries are not. And while there's been notices about different cemeteries that the Forest Lawn is interested in merging with, not all of those have gone forward.
Right, but
there are items in the queue, and I think, so my only request to the board is that we have an open dialogue about what you're going to do going forward, make sure.
Yeah, because I would say, just because the reason I interrupted, I don't really care if you can do it at a division level. This is a sufficient level. It should be discussed at the board level.
That wasn't my point.
Yeah, okay, so but we don't need to talk about that now because there's a threshold issue in front of us, which is this issue. There's an application made. I don't think we're prepared to approve it, and because advice of counsel was to have a conversation about some of the legal issues that you wanted to make sure the board was at least aware of. So again, whether they're public or not, I don't have any.
Right. Dave, just to give you some assurance and your client some assurance, the issues that are raised have nothing to do with the quality of the operations of Forest Lawn at all. And I've heard nothing negative about the way that they are operating the cemeteries that they have arranged. They're novel issues. And before they are, my guess is these will be discussed in open session, but before that happens, the board members should have the opportunity to talk to their counsel and have that dialogue before they have that dialogue.
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah, so there's nothing here that.
I'd like to know, the request was, why are you going to executive session on an issue that didn't appear there was a legal issue that shouldn't be discussed publicly? You've addressed that. My point is, As part of that dialogue, and if there are questions that come out of it, we'd like to be able to address those, and so that they're not acted on in a vacuum. Because I believe, based on the quality of the personnel that they've put together to review these potential mergers and to view this cluster model of them moving forward for the profitability of all the water,
I have no.
that they've addressed a lot of these.
I agree with that, and I didn't want to have that discussion. The threshold issue is whether we should be going to executive session to discuss some of the legal issues. I think the public debate is very important. It's not about an issue of opinion. Well, this is the first time, I think.
It's a very. I agree with Tony. This is something that is not common. It's not.
So the other mergers.
And it's potentially precedent setting, which
The
is,
other mergers did not address mergers or agreements with, outside of a normal county geographic boundary, right? Is that still true? So, again, I think
we've
that's.
crossed town lines, which already creates complexity
Right.
for abandonment,
So-
but crossing county lines is something, I don't know that we've had, I don't know the only merger I can think of where we have a cemetery in two different counties, do we have one or two? One definitely, Rockville Cemetery in Nassau County merged with Springfield Cemetery in Queens County. They are a couple of miles apart. It's two different jurisdictions, but they're a couple of miles apart. I think we might have had one other situation that was like that.
Thinking about Brooklyn, Staten Island merger.
Brooklyn,
That's-
Staten Island abandonment, correct.
Right.
That's also, but that's one city, so
Right.
that not even be the same
Well,
situation.
I wasn't going to go there, but, having been approached about taking over cemeteries in completely different boroughs, I mean, that's why I think this discussion merits a public discussion. At some point, when you have questions that we can answer, we would be happy to answer them ahead of time and to have a discussion, so that you're fully aware of what they're doing.
Yeah.
They've provided a very detailed application, but they have other materials that we'd be happy to provide to the board.
Great, and I think the discussion will have, executive session will help board members look at the materials that have been presented with a more informed eye, so we don't have the conversation, without them being answered. So,
You've answered my question, I appreciate that.
And I
we're-
apologize.
And we're happy to provide any information that we
I
can.
do apologize for any, timeline issues. Not everything proceeds along as quickly as I would like, but
Yeah. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I would just point out that, to Mr. Malillo's point, I think that while we're talking about these cluster model concepts and the cemeteries that are involved, we obviously want to move forward as quickly as we
Yeah.
can. But there are cemeteries, as your staff will point out to you, that are in less robust shape than Shenango Valley, who may be entering into this discussion. And
Right.
so that is part of the calculus on our part as to whether or not those cemeteries survive long enough.
yeah. Well, that's important. An earlier conversation that Paul had about the pressure on the families of fund with abandonments, we have more control over doing things to prevent abandonments than we do about getting additional money in the state budget. So, and just in terms of spending our energies, that's a place I certainly think we should go. All right, so have we teed it up enough in public session? Again, I think the issue is we also spoke in code, but for the public, there's a Forest Lawn is a large and successful cemetery that has already taken over, merged with a number of other smaller cemeteries as a way to manage their finances. They're making an application for one that's a little bit different because it's a farther reach. That is why we want to talk a little bit more in executive session, and it's a proper place to do it.
Legal issues.
Legal issues.
That arise from that, yes.
Arise from that.
Not the application itself, not the merger.
We specifically haven't put the application before the board. We have a ton of financial information from these guys, which we've written up, but we think it's premature to put that before the board before we get counsel. What we do have, which you guys have, this is public, there's nothing secret about this, is a very short summary of the proposed transaction, just so you know the facts.
Okay.
Before we go to executive session,
Well, hold on, Paul, are you comfortable with where we are?
Yes,
In terms of,
I am.
This is a topic for discussion, and we would make a motion at some point later to go to executive session?
Why don't you move to table this for executive session, or refer it, or whatever?
All right, well, I'm
And
gonna,
then before we
I don't
go
think,
into
I don't think we need to.
Okay, so before we go into executive session, there are two things we need to do. Three things, actually.
Okay, public comment,
That's one of them.
okay. Is there anybody here who would like to speak, address the board? Never happened.
Next,
Oh, no, I'm ready. I just,
next,
being a gentleman. is-
Next meeting, go for it.
Paul's leaving, so, you know.
next meeting is,
But we have scheduled the next
That's one
meeting,
of
but
the
we'll.
three things.
We,
we'll do it.
we wish you all the best on behalf of the association. Thank you for, David Funk from the New York State Association of Cemeteries, changing hats. All the best to you, and thank you for your contributions and your continuing dialogue. It's greatly appreciated. And that you've actually, you dig in on these things and take a closer look. So it's appreciated. And also, would just like to thank the board for having a public discussion about the fact that the abandonment fund is totally insufficient, and that there needs to be some other mechanism to make sure that there are funds available. We've had public discussions here in this meeting about what our concerns are, particularly related to the sales tax, and we very much think that those issues are linked. And given the ongoing fiscal pressures of New York that I've seen, at least in the last 6 years, whenever there's money or there's not money, there's always a problem about this particular fund. I think a dedicated funding stream mechanism makes more sense, whether or not that means a higher fee or some other filing fee. But this is it's an issue that's extremely important because these dollar amounts are not going to go down; they're going to go up, and costs go up. And this is what cemeteries experience all the time. To make a repair like some of the repairs that you've seen today, it's exponential in the next 5 years, 10 years. So the need is not going to go down. And in fact, it's going to increase. We're seeing the abandonments increasing while there hasn't been any. Well, let me just say, there's been, as you've seen, Mr. Ambrose, while you've been here, $1.5 million here, $2 million there, when there's only 900,000 plus being put in the fund. Clearly not sufficient.
right,
So thank you very much for your efforts.
thank you.
So our next meeting is scheduled for March 12th. I wanted to confirm before we go, I wanted to try to schedule the April meeting today as well, but before we go there, I want to make sure that, Tom, that works for you.
Well, we're trying to set meetings on a regular, we're not really scheduling them individually unless we have to.
But we didn't get we only got as far as March.
Right, so it's still set for the
The goal is till the second Tuesday.
second Tuesday of every month. I would like to stick to that as long as we can, and then vary that a particular meeting if required, right? But especially with, we may not be able to deal with Jill's travel with the Lieutenant Attorney General or individual schedules, but we got a better shot at it if we schedule it ahead. So
That's good? Okay, so for the record, the next second Tuesday would be April 9th.
April 9th. So
When is the policy conference? Is it April or May? It's May. So the May meeting will be at their policy conference. So
Okay.
we'll pencil in April 9th at 10:30 as well for the second meeting, the next meeting. May is going to be scheduled to be at NISAC's annual policy conference
always a good time.
down the road. Absolutely. Now that we're allowed to go into the Albany Hilton again.
Allowed is.
You too.
And so I'll make a motion that we move.
Wait.
Oh, well, yes, we have
Wait a
some
minute.
signatories. Yeah.
Yes, so we have something for you, Paul.
Yay.
We
I am not worthy.
Yes, you are.
Shovel, it is not in the form of a spade because he's come out looking kind of cooler. The square one, and we have here, we're going to present you with this, the New York State Department of State, Division of Cemeteries, to Paul Ambrose for service on the State Cemetery Board from December of 2014 through February of 2019.
Thank you very much.
You
Somebody
now
take
hit
a
me over the
picture.
head.
Good.
Quite an honor.
So thank you.
I'd love to add that. I mean, I just have this fear my role will have to change because you do very deep analysis. I rely on it, so you've really.
Tom's got
added a
to
lot.
work on his proofreading skills.
Yeah, you take the function very seriously, and it is appreciated and evident and has made a difference, so. And my kick serve's getting better every day.
Oh, Chad.
Thank you. Yeah.
Chad. Chad up here for this. Crap. You want to text him?
Text.
Call him.
All right,
Just step
well-
out so he can say goodbye.
All right, so, thank you, Paul, you say something if you'd like?
I would, but I wrote this out because I didn't want to miss anything just by forgetting about it if I started talking. So even though I'm the one retiring, I want to take this opportunity to express my appreciation too. And when I agreed to take this role on 4 years ago, I really had no idea what to expect. I mean, this was something completely out of my element, but I want to thank Commissioner Zucker for giving me this opportunity to participate on the board for the last 4 years. It's been a richly rewarding experience. And I'd like to thank Louis and Chet and the division staff, including those of you I see here every month and those who operate behind the scenes in offices all over the state. You all do an amazing job in helping our cemeteries to operate safely and legally. The people of New York State have been very fortunate to have you working on their behalf. Chet, I wish he was in the room.
He's on his
He's
way.
on
He's on his way.
We can show him.
Yeah, he's a truly dedicated professional and public servant, and I'm happy to have served with Chet, and I wish him all the best in his retirement. I'll certainly do that directly. Since we're both retiring at the same time, we'll have to start watching these board meetings streamed live on the internet every
maybe.
When it works.
second Tuesday of every month. Right. Tony, I greatly appreciate your trusted legal advice. I had the highest confidence in the board's decisions largely because of your input and guidance along the way. And the board members, Mark and Jill, who's not here unfortunately, and also Dan Shapiro and Chris Wiles, who I served with until their recent retirements. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with you, and I'm sure that you'll find Commissioner Zucker's new designee, Tom Fuller, to be a real asset to the board. And I'd like to thank a very special group of New Yorkers who serve on cemetery boards, those who manage, operate, advocate for, and work in cemeteries across the state, including cemeteries that don't fall under the board's oversight. And lastly, I'd like to express sincere appreciation to those selfless, kind, and giving volunteers across New York who give their time and service to our cemeteries, expecting nothing in return except for the intrinsic joy of giving and honoring those who have passed. It's been a pleasure to have served with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Last act, we'll make, I move to go into executive session. Second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
Aye.
Take a quick break and then we'll be back.
While we're futzing around with this.
We're on the record.
We're on the record, we've come out of executive session. There's no action was taken in executive session. Motion adjourned.